The following podcast contains language and content which some listeners may find offensive. Discretion is advised. You are now locked in to Daddyless Daughters, the podcast. My name is Karina Mills. And my name is Aliyah Ali. And together, we will be uncovering the layers of childhood trauma, relationships, sex, and men.
My hair was burnt. I stunk of fire. I would cut my arms, cut my legs, just cut anywhere on my body.
Hi, Stacy. My name is Karina. It's lovely to meet you, finally.
Nice to meet you.
How are you? How are you feeling?
A little bit nervous, but I'm good.
That's to be expected anyway. Thank you for coming on. It's a long time since we last saw each other face to face like this.
It is, yeah.
I know a bit about your story and I really wanted to invite you on to kind of pick up where we left off in our journey. It's been 10 years since we have been together as we met in Holloway. And yeah, when I met you during that time, we was both mentally in quite strange places, still trying to process where we was coming from and where we wanted to go ultimately. So yeah, I just wanted to give you this opportunity to kind of share your story, as I know that you can relate on so many different levels to what we're trying to create here. So I want to kind of get straight into it. And the first question is quite a direct question.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, how old was you when you first started to have suicidal thoughts?
I would say around maybe 11. I was 11 years old.
And did you act on those thoughts at 11?
So I would self-harm, but sort of nothing else for a good few years.
How did you use to self-harm?
So I would cut my arms, cut my legs, just cut anywhere on my body. I don't think necessarily then it was so much of a, I want to die. It was a, I don't want to be here anymore and I'm so frustrated. And I just needed to get that pain out because I had no one around me that I felt that I could talk to that could actually do anything, that could make a change. So.
And what was going on to you at that time in your life?
So I grew up in, it was a pretty violent home. Both my mum and the man that brought me up, I was led to believe that he was my father. And, you know, my first memory is being made to sleep in a bath. He smashed a car up with a sledgehammer whilst me and my sisters were inside of the car. My mum would just smack me straight in the face. It was pretty bad for like my first memory from when I was 6. So
yeah, I noticed that you said by the person you were told to be your father. Like, what did you mean by this?
So he's definitely not my biological father. Although he was rather violent, at a certain point in our lives, that changed and the abuse took a different form, more of control and less physical. When I was 13, my mum was so violent and I said, I just want to go and stay at my dad's. And she yelled at me, he's not your dad. And that's how I found out the man that had brought me up for 13 years, he wasn't my dad. And that started the mind games, you know, who am I? Where did I come from? Is this why? You know, me and my older sister always got it the worst. So yeah, he definitely wasn't my father. And that was a really hard thing to deal with.
I was going to say, because just you saying it gave me chills. Imagine being brought up with a man and then to find out that he's not even your dad.
It was a very hard thing to deal with because as much as he was violent when I was younger, you know, at 13, you're not aware of all the different types of abuse. You know, when I was 13, domestic abuse wasn't really, you know, it was domestic violence because violence was hitting, abuse was hitting, and it wasn't really explored much the other forms of abuse that can take place. So I just thought, you know, he's controlling, he's really strict, everything like that. But at a certain point, he had sort of changed from that. So, and to learn that he wasn't my dad, that really did break my heart.
Do you think, sorry, the way that your mum started to treat you, the relationship that you formed with him contributed to that?
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of like our savior. You know, when he did stop his aggression, he used to stick up for us quite a lot. And, you know, he would come round every day before school and after school and just check that we were okay. And, you know, him and her would argue so much all the time. I used to sit and think, what is it about her? Why is she so angry? I feel like her anger just spread. Because why did he stop being so angry as soon as he left this home? And I mean, it's not an excuse because he's an adult and he's in control of his actions. But through my life, I've seen her behaviour. I feel like her poison has sort of spread to any partner that she's with, and it changes them as a person. I think sometimes people forget that domestic abuse isn't always perpetrated by just a male. And definitely in my home growing up, it was definitely her as well. And then when they split up and it was just her in the home, there was no doubt about it that it was her that was the main perpetrator of this horrendous abuse. As a mother now, I could never imagine even contemplating saying or doing any of the things that my mother did to me to my own children. I mean, I tell my children off and I feel so horrendously awful because I never want to feel like I've made my child feel how she made me feel, if that makes sense.
Of course.
Of course.
So what age did the local authorities get involved, or did they get involved? Did they offer your family any support or solutions?
So it's I've got, you know, tiny little bits of information from my birth father about the goings on that happened when him and my mother split up, and social care was certainly involved at that point. He was begging them to get involved and to investigate because he knew what was going on in our home. And my mother actually, you know, I was born in America and me and my mum went back to America, and she left my sister here with this guy that had brought us up, but she at the time had only known him 4 months, and she left my sister here for 6 months with basically a complete stranger. And through the whole court custody battle, he was begging social care to get involved and they didn't really do anything. I had my leg broken when I was 1 year old. And I've just recently got my sort of health records from back then. And no one can say how it happens. There's conflicting stories about what happened. And then, you know, as I got to primary school and secondary school, everybody knew, all the teachers knew what she was like. So the local authority and certainly professionals were all aware of what was going on. It was a very hush-hush thing, I feel, you know, back then. And things were very hush-hush. I remember one day I asked to go to my auntie's house and she smacked me in the face in the middle of her work. And I remember I ran away and I went to the police station and they put me in a care home that night. I was very quiet, not confident, very conservative person. And I walked in and I was so scared. And I was there for a few days. Then they said, you're going to go back to your mum because we can't prove anything. And her boss was like, no, like I watched that woman smack her in the face. So I ended up living with my boss and her partner for a few months. And then it kind of made things awkward at work for my mum's boss. And my mum would say, you know, I won't hit you again, I promise, you know, you can do what you want. And I'm like, but it's not, I want to do what I want. I just didn't want to be hit anymore. I didn't want to be hit. I didn't want to be talked down to or belittled or anything like that. I just wanted a normal family unit. I didn't want the Brady Bunch. I just wanted normality. So I went back and that lasted probably 9 months. So I'd say social care were aware from when I was like 4 months old.
And throughout all this time, was everybody aware that you was hurting yourself as well? You were self-harming?
She was, and my sisters were, and my school counsellor was, but she was just like, you should cut deeper. That's all she would say.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
So as far as I'm aware, the day that you was arrested, you was actually in the process of trying to end your life.
Mm-hmm.
Could you kind of walk us through what happened that day?
Yeah, so there was many things that had happened sort of between me leaving home on my 16th birthday and the day I tried to kill myself. I tried to get help with mental health. They just kept saying, oh, you know, take these tablets, you'll be okay. And there was, you know, a lot of alcohol involved, and I'd seen things that, you know, someone my age, and certainly in the area that I was living, you know, I'm from the countryside, so, you know, we don't have some of the crimes that may happen sort of in the bigger areas, and if we do, it's not on that large scale. So, you know, my childhood massively affected me, and then dealing with my childhood and the way I dealt with it led on to me just not wanting to live anymore. And basically my birth father actually lives in London, and I travelled down to London and I kind of spent the day with him, and I knew that I was going to try and end my life. I just wanted to sort of say goodbye. And I went to see my best friend, and I spoke to all my family that day, and I went home and I set fire to my bed, and I padlocked my front door shut, and I actually put something against the front door so you couldn't just simply kick it in. And I shut my bedroom door, and I put my headphones in, and the last thing that I remember is I heard the electrics pop, I heard the TV explode open, and then I felt the mirror off the wall above me fall down, and I could hear the plaster and the paint burning off the walls. And then that was it. I'd passed out basically. And then I remember sort of vaguely coming around, and I was laid outside on the floor with an oxygen mask. There was paramedics around me. I could hear someone screaming my name, and then I could hear someone else saying, she's dead, she's dead. And then they put me in the ambulance, took me to the hospital, and then that's when I really came around. And I remember they tried taking my phone that I had with me. I was listening to music on my phone, so I'd passed out, and my sister was like, oh, I'll take that. And they manhandled my sister, and I sort of got upset, and I was like, no, don't hurt her, like she's tiny, leave her alone. And that was it then. The police slammed me on the floor, handcuffed me in the middle of the hospital. My mum walked through the corridor, and at this time she'd had a baby like 3 weeks prior. So she had the baby in her arms, and she just looked down at the floor on me, and I was like begging my mum to help me. And she just said that I was an embarrassment and walked away. So then I was taken to the police station, and that was on a Sunday night. Was obviously interviewed. My solicitor gave a prepared statement, and I was charged with arson with intent to endanger life. And I appeared at the magistrates on the Tuesday, and then I was taken to prison. I was taken to Bronzefield prison, and I was put on the induction wing, and it was a pretty scary place. Bronzefield isn't as segregated as Holloway is, so you get a lot of mixture of people that necessarily shouldn't be mixed. Yeah. So obviously, you know, you get lifers there, you get people who have stabbed people, and, you know, obviously you met me in Holloway. I'd already been in for like 3 to 6 months by the time I'd met you. So I'd already got a chance to sort of get into the flow of what was going on and the kind of environment I was in, and I was learning about how to approach people and how not to approach people. And at that point I was still very unsure, very, you know, I remember you used to tell me all the time, you know, you need to stand up for yourself. So if you think, you know, after that amount of time of being in, what I was like when I did first go in, and I remember having a pouch of Old Alburn, and they swarmed me. They were like, what you got, what you got, what you got? And I was there in a bright yellow police station tracksuit. My hair was burnt. The glue for my extensions was glued to my head. I was covered in soot. I stunk of fire because I wasn't allowed to have a wash or anything like that in the police station. And it was like a really, really scary time, but I don't think I really knew what was going on straight away. I was just kind of like in a bubble. Then I was put in a cell on my own.
Yeah, that's what I want to know. When you got in that cell, like we all had that moment when our head hits that pillow, you're looking at the ceiling and you're processing. What was going through your head?
At that time, I didn't expect to be in jail for so long. And I was just thinking, you know, my solicitor, she's amazing. They can't charge me with this. Like, I tried to kill myself. You know, I'm not crazy where I need to go to a hospital, but I do need some sort of mental health assistance. So that was just swirling around in my head, like, I need to get out. I need to get out. Like, it was crazy. There's just so many emotions that are going around in your head, and you're listening to all the shouting that's going on around you because you are on an induction house, and people are coming in and they want their fix because they're withdrawing from drugs, or, you know, someone stole something from someone else, or all these things that are going on in your head. And I'd never ever seen the inside of a prison before. Not really, like, I visited friends, but you obviously never go past a visiting room. So for me, I'd only ever watched prison on TV, and that's not how it is in real life. And it was so scary for me. It was so scary. And I remember the prison officer that first introduced me, and she said to me, "You don't belong here. You do not belong here." And I was just like, it is what it is. Like, I'm here. Hopefully it won't be for long. And I remember the bail officer said to me, you know, you've been refused bail 3 times, like, you're not getting out. And I was just like, okay, that's a bit of a killer. Then I was sentenced, and I got a lot less than what I was being told to expect. So in that way, I was so happy. And at this point, I'd been in for 3 months, and it was pretty shocking for a lot of people that I met that I'd received a prison sentence for trying to kill myself. Because when you go down to the basic facts, that is what I tried to do. I tried to kill myself. So a lot of people in there, you know, they show a compassion that it's sad to say that a lot of my friends and family didn't show. But yet these strangers, who a lot of people think are the scum of the earth, can show a lot more compassion than people that share your DNA.
Yeah. Can you tell me more about the relationships that you formed when you was in prison? Like, what type of characters did you attract when you was in such a vulnerable state?
So in the first jail, I was with a lot of people that, you know, had drug problems, and they made it seem like they were your friend, but they were just out for what they could get and rarely showed genuine compassion. There was a couple of times, you know, when you're in prison and you get some bad news or something, and I lost my temper a couple of times. But, you know, generally I kept myself to myself, and I think people saw that as a vulnerable thing. So I didn't necessarily make genuine friends sort of in Bronzefield. Then I got the news that I was being shipped to Holloway. I remember that day so well. Holloway is one of the most notorious jails in Europe, and automatically people make judgment. And I was like, I'm going to die. They are going to beat the crap out of me there. I'm going to die. I got there and it was totally different. So I went on the induction wing and I met some girls. I remember the first day that I met Ali, and I remember she walked onto the wing and I was like, I'm not going to mess with this girl. she looked mean. I remember her hair was so nicely up, and she had the whitest trainers on I thought I'd ever seen in my life. But I was just like, yeah, she does not look like she wants to be my friend.
I didn't want to be nobody's friend. I made that clear from the jump.
And I remember you saying that, you said that a few times, like, I'm not here to make friends. And I was just like, okay, that's fine, be courteous. And it was strange because I'd already made some friends on this new wing that I was on. And then I saw the personalities of other girls that were nice to your face, but then would slate you behind your back. Again, they were just out for what they can get, a radio, or, my sister was always sending me in hair extensions. So, can they send me in this? And, you get a lot of shit stirrers in jail, but there was definitely a couple of people that I felt helped me through my time at Holloway. And you just see that people have lived such different lives to each other, but so many people also have lived such similar lives, but in different aspects. And it really made me feel like, brought me back down to earth, and made me realise that I'd grown up stereotyping people without really having enough knowledge to give me the right to do so.
So when you did come out now, obviously I know from my own experience, the rehabilitation process is not as supportive as it should be. It's more like supervision than support.
Yeah.
And from your point of view, I want to know, like, what kind of relationships did you go on to form? You have children now, you didn't have children back then. What's kind of happened in this third chapter of your life so far?
So when I was released, I wasn't allowed to go to a bail hostel because of my offence. You've got to find your own accommodation. And I ended up having to go and stay with my mum, who 2 weeks later, me and her were caught by the probation officer walking in the house. Literally, she had me by the throat, and she said, you better take her back to jail because I don't want her here anymore. So then after that, I ended up staying with the friends, met my daughter's dad. Very quick, unexpected pregnancy, and due to me getting so independent whilst I was in jail, he was kind of like, you're going to move in and you're going to be chained to the kitchen sink. And I was like, no. I was too independent for that. I'd already got a job. So we ended up splitting up, and that was it. He's never met my daughter, doesn't have anything to do with her. I get child maintenance occasionally, but that's it. He didn't never want to be involved. He wanted nothing to do with it, as he calls her. But, if it wasn't for my daughter, I would have gone back to jail because that was the easier option for me. I'd settled in jail. I wasn't happy coming out, but I had my daughter, and she, as cliche as it sounds, she really did save me. She gave me something to stay out for. I just say, you're your mummy's best friend, and mummy couldn't imagine being without you. I had a few up and down relationships that weren't brilliant. And then I met my son's birth father, and from 6 weeks in, it was horrendous. He attacked me when I was pregnant with my son. I begged social services to help. They put me in a refuge up north, and I didn't hear from anybody for the 5 weeks that I was there. I was completely unsupported, severely ill in my pregnancies, no support whatsoever. So I ended up coming back down south, and, his abuse continued. It was easier to just be with him than try and end the relationship, because when I ended the relationship, that's when I was more fearful for my life, and social care didn't want to help. There's over 25 police reports from when he's assaulted me and, you know, kicked off and things like that. And then they ended up putting both the children on a child protection plan after he put me in the hospital in 2016. Now, this assault was probably the worst on me. He rendered me unconscious in front of my daughter, who was 3 at the time. And he's admitted to everything that he's ever done. And then social care got involved again. And I said, look, can you help me with contacts? Because you're telling me that I can't stop him from seeing the children, but I don't have any other means to let him have contact. And they said, no, we don't get involved in contact. So it ended up him pretty much carrying on, but this time he would start involving the children. So I was assaulted after a night out in 2017, and at this time we was in a relationship purely for, like I said, fear that it was just easier. And I remember one day he said to my daughter, you know, mummy was raped in her bed, that's why she doesn't sleep there anymore. And I kicked him out, and I told the social workers that, and they didn't believe me. And I received no support from social care at that time, given the injuries that I suffered from the assault, that I still have ongoing medical issues from now, and it's like 3 years down the line. Given the psychological effect that it's had due to my injuries, received no support whatsoever. Although they were around, sort of buzzing around my head, they weren't there to support us. And then I didn't drink after that night, because when I was assaulted, I was unconscious, and that was from drinking out of someone else's drink, and I'd been spiked. So I didn't drink alcohol after that. I didn't go out. So that was in August. And then in June 2018, I said, you know what, I'm just going to go out with a few of the girls, but I'm not going to drink. I was the designated driver. So it came to 3 a.m. in the morning, and he was texting me saying that he was having me followed, he'd known what I'd done, blah, blah, blah. And I was on the phone to him trying to reassure him that, you know, we're not together anymore, but I'm still not out doing that stuff. Like, the reason why I was being like that was because after what happened to me, I didn't even want to go near him, let alone anyone else, you know, and I wasn't drunk. I hadn't drank at all. Then the next morning, he was ringing me, giving me abuse, you know, in front of my children. And he was saying, you know, mummy's got to go and wash the man off her from last night. And at this point, his contact with the children was being supervised by his brother and sister-in-law, who he lived with, and I think they've got 8 children between them. So they were present when all of this stuff was going on. And I just said to my daughter, you know, mummy's going to go now, and I'm going to pick you up in an hour. I'm just going to jump in the shower, and then I'll be there. And I had 49 missed calls within 35 minutes of him that morning, and a lot of abusive text messages. So I picked my daughter up and my son, and to avoid argument with him, I just sat in the car, pulled up straight in front of the house. He put the kids in the car, and then I went to meet my friend, who we were going swimming with the kids. So, you know, I'm driving, so I'm not looking in the back, but I'm talking to the kids as I'm driving, and it's about a 3-minute drive to the sports centre. And I pull up, and my daughter gets in the front seat, and she's got a big cut down her face. And it goes from under her eye right down to the bottom of her chin. And straight away, I feel so bad about swearing, but I said, what the fuck happened to your face? She said, he pushed me into the coffee table. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, he shouted at me and pushed me into the coffee table. So my friend that I was meeting happened to be a social worker, but I'd grown up with her. And she said, look, you need to ring out of hours, and you need to figure out what you're going to do about this. So I rang them, and they said, we're going to ring you back. And I texted him, and I said, what the fuck am I meant to say? Like, what have you done? And he just read it and didn't respond. And then about an hour later, he said, yeah, I did push her. And I ended up taking her to the police station, and then I took her to the hospital to make sure that she was okay, because she'd only just had a tooth taken out. and she'd had to have surgery for that. So he'd actually opened up the wound in her mouth. There was blood coming from this. It wasn't just a scratch. There was blood coming from this cut on her face. So the police were like, oh, well, we'll make our inquiries. I was like, go and arrest him. Like, she's 5. He's just assaulted her. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you guys? Like, he's got a history of domestic violence. Like, we're high risk from him. Like, go and do something. You know, here's the proof. He's just admitted in a text message he's pushed her. Like, look at his behaviour before that. So he was invited in for an interview a week later. Yeah, invited in, voluntary. And my daughter had already given a statement via video, and she soiled herself halfway through. And I didn't hear from social care. They didn't bother coming out. So they went to see him the next day, and they made him sign something to say that he wasn't going to be unsupervised with any children. And he admitted to them that he'd shoved her. He actually said, yeah, I pushed her and what. And it wasn't until I met my now husband that social services decided that they needed to do a risk assessment. And that peeved me off, because I was like, you didn't get involved when she was assaulted by a very dangerous person, but you want to get involved now that I met someone else and we're happy and she's going to therapy and everything else. And they decided after their assessment, it was quite a long, lengthy assessment. And during this assessment, it had come out that my son's birth father has actually locked her in a toilet and exposed himself to her. She disclosed to professionals, not to me, because as her mum, she knows that I get very protective of my children, and she obviously felt that she didn't want to upset me, and she was very ashamed. So there was a lot of concern around her sexualised behaviour in school, and, you know, then when she disclosed this, the ball dropped. So they decided that they weren't then going to get involved. Me and my husband were fine, and they told me that my ex, he was a risk to the children. If he wanted to see my son, he had to take me to court, and I was doing everything in my power to safeguard the children, and that was brilliant. They told me to get a non-molestation order, so I got that. You know, it came breaches of bail, breaches of court bail. He was never ever arrested, even though I had all the proof. Got to court for his trial, and his sister-in-law attacked me in the court waiting room in front of everyone, and the police never done anything about it. So my daughter didn't even get the respect to have a police officer deal with it. It was a civilian investigator deal with the case. Although she was brilliant, she got the charge, she got it to court. He, after admitting it this whole time, decided to then go not guilty. And I had to watch the video of my daughter giving evidence. I had to listen to all his family slagging off my now 6-year-old daughter. And then his sister-in-law, who was meant to be supervising, stood up and admitted that she saw him push her, and they found him not guilty because they couldn't prove that he intended to cause the injury. No, you may not have intended to cut her face open, but you were reckless in your behaviour. So after he got the not guilty, his new flavour jumped up and said, you know, let's go and get our son. And that sparked a fire in me. And I was like, he's not your son. You've never met my son. You know, I was like yelling and shouting, and I was so angry. And the solicitor that sits in front of the magistrates actually spoke to them afterwards and said, you were wrong in your verdict. You should have found him guilty. But that was the end of that. And then me and my husband, at some point, it was a very difficult relationship. He's got quite a complicated background with his ex-partner, who he shares 2 children with. And she's messaged me and said, you know, I'm still in love with, I'll always love him, and I just want us to be a family. And I'm like, you're texting his wife this, you know, you've got issues. And, you know, because of her behaviour, and obviously what I'd been through in my life and what he'd been through, our relationship at times, you know, we've had arguments. So, you know, in the last year, social services have decided to try and remove the children from my care. And when they got involved after we had an argument, my husband hasn't been allowed back to the family home in 10 months. And they took us to pre-proceedings in which I did everything that they asked me to do. My husband was diagnosed with PTSD due to social services and what they did with his children to him. And my social worker had been dishonest, which I now have gained the evidence of, and I've got her confession on tape. She failed our parenting assessment. So straight away, my husband, that triggered his PTSD. And I found him at his dad's house, and he had tried to cut his own throat. So he was put in hospital. And then during this time, the social worker had said that my ex-partner's parenting assessment was extremely positive. This is a man who's admitted to being a drug addict and admitted to assaulting a 5-year-old and has convictions for domestic violence. But yet my husband doesn't have a criminal record. I obviously do, but we failed our parenting assessment. 2 weeks before Christmas, I was told to pack my children's clothes and write them a letter because they were going to be taken. Now, I haven't spent a night away from my children since 2018, so it was 1.5 years that I'd even spent away from my children. And I spent from 11 a.m. till 6:45 p.m. in a courtroom fighting. What I felt was fighting for my life. And the judge ripped me a new one, but obviously all she had at that point was the false evidence given by social services, because I was given 48 hours notice of the court hearing. Luckily, my children remain in my care. However, they are on a care order, which means I don't hold full parental responsibility for my children.
Last question I have for you, because we're running out of time, is, you know, if you met your younger self, or even if you knew your daughter was going to listen to this in a couple years, what would be like the last positive message that you would leave for daddyless daughters that can relate to what you're saying, single mothers that can relate to what you're saying?
I would say you're definitely not alone in the world and in situations that you're going through, and to open up and to talk. Follow your gut as well. You know, in relationships, if you feel something isn't right, just stay strong. And definitely for people that are having thoughts of suicide, there's a massive world out there, and you'll be missed no matter if it's by one person or 10 people. There's a life after depression. There's a life after suicidal thoughts. Just keep fighting. Quite a lot of the time, you know, I get tired and I say, I'm tired of fighting everyone. I'm tired of this, I'm tired of that. But there's always someone else that needs you to stay strong, no matter who it is, whether it's your child, a family member, a friend. You know, you're never alone in fighting any battle that you fight, no matter how alone you feel. Just pick up the phone to anybody that you feel you can talk to, or whether it's a charity that's designated to talk to people that are going through those issues. Utilize them because they're there. Just stay strong and know your worth, I think, is the biggest thing. Know your worth.
Yeah.
So
thank you so much for that. Literally, thank you.
That's okay.
So much.
I just want to say
sharing
thank
your
you
story.
guys for letting me share my story. It's felt good to get it out there.
So you've done amazing coming on here and telling your story, because you're telling it for yourself and you're sharing it, and we thank you for that. But you're also telling it for, like Lee said earlier, a lot of women out there, a lot of mothers out there, a lot of people who have been suicidal out there. You are telling it for so many different people and characters. You've done something big.
Thank you so much.
Guys, it's been a pleasure. And I just would like, my last final thoughts is, although we spend so many years fighting and it is tiring and it feels like, you know, an energy exchange that is lost, I want us to all bear in mind that, you know, we're building spirits of warriors. And I don't know where the next life is going to take us, but I know we're some strong spirited people, and whatever's next is for us.
Thank you for listening to Daddyless Daughters, the podcast. Don't forget to follow us on Insta at daddyless_daughters. And for more information on how you can get involved, then please visit the website at www.daddylessdaughters.co.uk. If you've been affected by any of the topics raised in today's podcast, then please call one of the following helplines. For Samaritans, call 116 123. For Bernardo's, call 0800 1111. Or alternatively, call Mind on 0800 123 3393. Thank you.